Good morning students. Today we are going to have our fourth video lesson of Geography Class 6. We will complete chapter number 2 today. The topic is Weather and Climate. We will cover the information given on page number 10 and 11. The time duration of today's lesson is 35 minutes and the resources required are Secondary Social Studies Book 1, Notebook and pens. By the end of this lesson, you should be able to explore ocean currents, explain the role of ocean currents in determining the climate of a place, write the importance of rainfall for the climate of a place, write the role of air pressure to determine the climate of a place, and explore how direction of wind affects the climate of a place. Now before we start a lesson, let's recall a few basic facts we discussed in our previous lesson. What is the difference between weather and climate? Weather is the day-to-day condition of atmosphere at a particular place. However, climate refers to the average weather conditions of a place over a long period of time. Why is it important to know about the weather or climate of a place? It is important to know about the climate of a place before one visits a place, as many factors of our life depend on climate, like dress, food, etc. It also helps people to prepare for severe weather conditions before they strike. How does the distance from equator affect the climate of a place? Places near equator are warmer than the places located away from the equator. How does the altitude affect climate? The higher we are, the colder it is. So places with high altitude have very cold climate. How does proximity affect the climate? Usually the sea keeps places near the coast cooler in summer and milder in winter than those places that are in the interior of large countries. Now let's discuss the next factor that determines the climate of a place. Ocean currents. What are ocean currents? Ocean currents are the continuous, predictable directional movement of sea water driven by gravity, wind, and water density. Let's watch a video published by NASA to observe the ocean currents. Wavy and circular lines on the surface of the earth you can see are basically the currents in the oceans. How do the ocean currents affect the climate? Ocean currents act much like a conveyor belt, transporting warm water and precipitation from the equator towards the poles and cold water from the poles back to the tropics. Now you know that the North Pole and the South Pole are the coldest places on the earth. and the places near equator are warm. So the seawater from equator, it goes towards the poles, and the cold water from the poles come to the equator. So in that way, the water circulation from cold to warm and warm to cold, it really affects the climate of different places of the earth. These currents regulate the global climate. So without currents in the ocean, regional temperatures would be more extreme, super hot at the equator, and frigid towards the poles, and much less of the Earth's land would be habitable. The next factor that determines the climate of a place is rainfall. World's average rainfall is between 1000 and 2000 mm a year. Areas having less rainfall are dry, however, areas having more rainfall are wet. Cherrapunji in Assam had 22,990 mm of rain one year in 1861, which is world record. Now, how high would the rain in Cherrapunji reach in your school if it all stayed on the ground? Now 22,990 mm means it's around 23 meters, and 23 meters is, as high as the top of a few buildings. Now you just need to see what might be the height of the building of your school and see how high rainfall would reach in your school if it all stayed on the ground. Air pressure is the next factor that determines the climate of a place. We know that air exerts pressure on everything. When the pressure is high, the weather is usually fine and dry. And when the pressure is low, it's usually stormy and wet. Another factor that affects the climate of a place is direction of wind. If a place mainly has north winds, it is usually cold because they blow in from the Arctic or colder regions. In southern hemisphere, it is the southerly winds that are cold. If the wind blows across a large area of sea, they pick up large amounts of water and produce a rainy climate. If a place faces north in the northern hemisphere, it is usually cool. If it faces south, it is usually warmer. Why is it so? Because in northern hemisphere, north means to the North Pole, and North Pole is a very cold area. And in south of the northern hemisphere, the places are near equator, and definitely near equator it's warmer. Can you think of any other factor that might affect the climate? These might be location on the shaded side of high ground, that is, in the rain shadow. Urban areas like towns and cities have higher temperatures, 1 to 3 degrees as compared to the rural areas, which have open spaces and more vegetation. Size of a place might also affect the climate of a place. Like a small island has a different climate as compared to a land mass Now let's recall what we have learned today. What are ocean currents? What is the role of ocean currents in determining the climate of a place? How is rainfall important for determining the climate of a place? What is the role of air pressure to determine the climate of a place? And how direction of wind affects the climate of a place? Check your answers. What are ocean currents? Ocean currents are the continuous, predictable directional movement of seawater driven by gravity, wind, and water density. What is the role of ocean currents in determining the climate of a place? Ocean currents regulate the Earth's temperature. Without currents in the ocean, regional temperatures would be more extreme, super hot at the equator and frigid towards the poles, and much less of Earth's land would be habitable. How is rainfall important for determining the climate of a place? Rainfall is an important factor to determine the climate of a place. Areas having less rainfall are dry, however, areas having more rainfall are wet. What is the role of air pressure to determine the climate of a place? When the pressure is high, the weather is usually fine and dry. When the pressure is low, it is usually stormy and wet. How direction of wind affects the climate of a place? The direction of wind affects the climate of a place. For instance, if the wind blows across a large area of sea, they pick up large amounts of water and produce a rainy climate in coastal areas. Now let's practice. Your task number 1 is to read page number 10 and 11 of your textbook. Your task number 2 is to complete question number 1 to question number 4 from page number 11 in notebook. And your homework is to complete question number 5 from page number 11 in your notebook. For completing question number 5, you need to find some information about Gilgit, about the weather or climate of Gilgit and Singapore, and then only you can complete this exercise. I hope you enjoyed today's lesson. Have a good day.